To the family living next to the sprawling mansion in Rothenburg, Germany, Armin Meiwes seemed like a perfect neighbor. He would mow their lawns for them, help fix their cars, and was always friendly and kind. He appeared that way to his neighbors and to everyone he came into contact with. Even his murder victim would likely attest to his politeness and kindness, if he were here. But he is not. He met a fate that to most would sound like the last way someone would choose to die. But apparently that was not the case for this victim. It was his preferred method of death. But no matter how desirable it was to those involved, it was gruesome, hard to watch, and so horrific, so inconceivable that there weren't any laws to even address it. Welcome back to Crime A to Z, where we detail cases and criminals from their very beginning until well after other reporting ends. Today we'll be talking about the case of Armin Meiwes, nicknamed the Rothenburg Cannibal. It's a case where a man places an ad for a volunteer to be consumed, and much, much worse. This case triggers a lot of questions, but the biggest one for many is why in the world someone would respond and willingly accept an offer that most would assume would be attractive to exactly no one. Join us to see why any such assumption would prove to be terribly wrong, as we cover the case that took internet dating to a whole new level. And before we start, if you like this video or any of our videos, we'd be ever so grateful if you'd hit like, subscribe, and preferably share. We're grateful for your support. Let's go. Armin Meiwes was born in Essen, Germany on December 1st, 1961. His father was a police officer who, at the age of 40, married his mother, who was 21. Armin also had two older half-brothers. To house his family, Armin's father saved up enough money and purchased a 16,000 square foot mansion in Rothenburg, Germany. Already far more space than the family of five needed, it became even more so when Armin's two, much older siblings moved out of the home when Armin was around 5 or 6 years old. With his siblings gone, Armin and his parents were the only ones left in the huge home. And according to Armin, it was less than ideal. He said that his mother was not loving and would never show any affection. She was controlling, possessive, and jealous. She would accuse her husband of having an affair, and they would fight regularly, with her even threatening to kill him if he were ever to leave her. Armin didn't feel any closeness to her. All she ever seemed to do was yell at him and belittle him. She treated him more like a servant than a son. And just like she was with her husband, she was possessive of Armin as well, accompanying him wherever he went, even through his early adulthood, even on dates. Then, within a couple of years after Armin's siblings left the scene, so did his father. When Armin was 7 years old, his father just took off and left him and his mother. He didn't give any warning or explanation, and they never saw him again. To help deal with the loss and trauma in his life, Armin retreated into a fantasy world. He made up imaginary friends to talk to and keep him company, including an imaginary brother he named Frankie. Having imaginary friends is not terribly out of the ordinary for a young child without friends or siblings. But Armin's fascination with his imaginary friends was far more sinister in nature. An avid reader, Armin had immersed himself in reading. Two books that he had either read himself or his mother had read to him as a young child piqued a fascination in him. Hansel and Gretel, which was about a witch who traps two children and prepares to eat the boy, and Robinson Crusoe, an adventure novel about a castaway. Both contained accounts of cannibalism, and the concept thoroughly intrigued Armin. His thoughts became consumed by them. He strongly felt that in order to be more connected to his imaginary friends, that they should be a part of him, inside of him. He said that he felt that if they were to become a part of me, I have to eat them. So he would fantasize about eating his imaginary friends so that they would never leave him. He would also barbecue dolls, and he would form human limbs out of marzipan, then place them inside of bread rolls and eat them. Fast forward to Armin becoming an adult. In 1980, when he was 19, he joined the West German Army. He served for 12 years, but since he was stationed near his home, he continued to live with his mother, who was still possessive. She would actually accompany him on his troop assignments. During his time in the service, he had friendships with women, but none of them developed into anything serious. His friends had long suspected that Armin was gay, despite Armin lying and saying that he had an out-of-town female fiancée. At some point during his service, Armin turned to drinking. A lot. He was ultimately discharged from the army, for getting into 2 car accidents while driving under the influence. So, at age 32, unemployed and caring for his ailing mother, Armin made a career change. He trained to become a computer repair technician. He had gotten a job at a bank and was working there in the 1990s, when the internet, or the World Wide Web as it was referred to back then, came into existence. And with it came access to forums. Chat platforms where like-minded people could connect to discuss their topic of interest with other enthusiasts. Like you can today, you could pretty much find a forum for whatever topic you were interested in, including, apparently, cannibalism. There were several chat rooms dedicated to the subject, including one called Cannibal Cafe. And since the internet was still in its infancy, there was little to no oversight or policing of forums, or any other online activity for that matter. So, people who had a desire to both eat and to be eaten would come to Cannibal Cafe and other forums to share their thoughts, ideas, fantasies, and more. Armin was elated. He had found his people. They validated that his feelings were not isolated to just himself. Suddenly, what had been his own private fantasies began to look like something that could become a reality. Then, in 1999, after a prolonged illness, Armin's mother passed away. He was genuinely saddened by her passing and even turned one of the rooms in the mansion into a shrine for her, complete with a mannequin that he had crafted to represent her. Despite his grief, Armin quickly recognized a newfound freedom. He began frequenting a brothel called the Blue Moon, and he also suddenly felt free to go gangbusters on his cannibal internet interests. Cannibal Cafe, whose fate and link we'll talk about in the Z section, featured posts as gruesome as "girls roasting on an open fire" and "cut off my butt and make a nice rump roast dinner," and many, many, many more that we're not allowed to mention here. When Armin posted, he would sometimes include photos, but since he didn't have any actual cannibal experience, he would take pictures of animal meat that he had sculpted into the shape of body parts and claim that he had cannibalized people. He gained admiration and a following, being one of the few people who claimed to have acted on his cannibalistic fantasies, rather than just wishing, like everyone else on the forums. And although Armin was fraudulently claiming he had cannibalized in the past, he planned to turn it into the truth. Free from the watchful eye of his mother, he turned one of the bedrooms in the mansion into what he planned to use as a slaughter room. He built it out to be soundproof, with no windows, and with meat hooks hanging from the ceiling. Then, it was time to start putting his fantasies into action. Using the name of his imaginary brother, Frankie, he advertised on Cannibal Cafe and similar sites, looking for a volunteer, a willing participant to be eaten by him, which was by no means an abnormal request on the sites. Specifically, his ad read, "Looking for a well-built 18 to 25-year-old to be slaughtered and then consumed." Armin's main objective was that he wanted a willing participant. He had received dozens of responses to his ads, but ultimately, the respondents would back out at some point. Most of the people in the forum were looking for roleplay or simply acting out their fantasies, but they had no intentions of actually carrying any of them out. But not everyone. One of the men who said he fantasized about being eaten arranged to meet Armin at his mansion, which they did. When he arrived, Armin's date laid on the table, while Armin explained what he was going to do to him. But the man couldn't go through with it. He told Armin he wasn't feeling well, and then he changed his mind. Armin respected his decision. Since the man was no longer a willing participant, he could not fulfill Armin's fantasy. He allowed the man to leave. Armin would go on to meet 3 other men, all of whom would also back out at some point. But there would be one last prospect. Bernd Jurgen Armando Brandes was a 43-year-old software engineer from Berlin. He had grown up in a single-parent household, just like Armin had for much of his childhood, except Bernd was raised by his father instead of his mother. Bernd worked as a manager at Siemens AG and was reported to be known in the local gay prostitution community for his interest in mutilation. Bernd himself had placed his own ad looking to be eaten. And in February of 2001, even though he and another man were currently in a romantic relationship, Bernd answered Armin's ad. While it's been widely reported that Bernd responded to Armin's ad on Cannibal Cafe, he actually responded to his similar ad on a gay cannibal Yahoo group, and that's how they connected. They corresponded back and forth for about 1 month discussing the best ways for Bernd to be consumed, with Bernd actively suggesting methods along with Armin, including Bernd sharing that he wanted his skull to be used as an ashtray. He also shared that he wanted his penis to be severed, and for both of them to eat it. His ultimate fantasy. The couple arranged to meet on March 9th. In the meantime, they continued corresponding, with Armin going by the handle Antrophagus, and Bernd going by Cater99. Bernd messaged, "I hardly know what to expect. Have you slaughtered a man before?" Armin responds, "Unfortunately, only in my dreams, but in my thoughts I do it every night." Bernd says, "I hope you have also already thought about what's to be done with the rest. Fulfilling the dream shouldn't become a nightmare for you. No one will know where I've disappeared to." Armin replies, "After you're dead, I'll take you out and expertly carve you up. There won't be much of you left." Bernd says, "I see you've thought about it. Good. Sounds like I'm the first." Armin replies, "And you won't be the last. Hopefully." The day before their date, Bernd wrote, "I'll bring myself as breakfast." Armin replied, "I'll have an appetite. Rely on it." Once the couple arrived at Armin's mansion, they went straight into the living room where, according to Armin, Bernd undressed so that Armin could admire his dinner. The two men engaged in sex. Then at some point, as they were hanging out drinking coffee, smoking, and socializing, Bernd decided he couldn't go through with the plan and asked to be taken back to the train station. Faced again with an unwilling participant, Armin politely obliged and took Bernd back to the train station. But just before he was about to board, Bernd proposed to Armin that they try again. He suggested that if he took a large dose of sleeping pills, some liquor, and cold medicine, perhaps it would dull the pain and he could go through with it. They returned to the mansion where Bernd willingly entered Armin's soundproof slaughter room. Bernd instructed Armin to bite off his penis, telling him, "Do it, now." Armin tried to follow his date's wishes, but biting off his genitals proved to be easier said than done. He tried, but it wasn't working. So he had to resort to using a kitchen knife to sever the man's organ. According to both Armin and the video recording that Armin had set up to capture the entire encounter, Bernd screamed horribly for a very short period, about 20 to 30 seconds, all while his blood spurted from his open wound like a fountain. But after that, he fell silent, claiming that it didn't hurt anymore. Bernd remained conscious. He was eager to taste his own flesh. The men tried consuming the man's organ raw, but it was far too tough, or as Armin described it, chewy. So Armin attempted to cook it, sautéing it in a pan with salt, pepper, garlic, and wine. But as Armin was both cooking the organ and frequently returning to check on Bernd, he ended up burning it. It had shriveled up to almost nothing and was rendered too tough to eat, so Armin chopped what was left of it into chunks and fed it to the dog. At some point, Bernd asked Armin if he would draw him a bath where he could bleed out and die a little more comfortably. Armin obliged, and while he waited for Bernd to finish dying in the tub, Armin retreated to his room to read his Star Trek book. After about 3 hours had passed, Armin went to check on Bernd and found that, even though unconscious, he was still alive. So, with Bernd taking too long to die, Armin decided to put him out of his misery. He kissed the man once, then finished him off by taking a large kitchen knife to his throat. After he stabbed Bernd to death, he hung his body on the room's meat hooks and proceeded to cut the body into pieces as he had learned to do online. As he was slicing up Bernd's body, he said he thought to himself, "The next one mustn't be this fat." The entire gruesome series of events was captured on the 2-hour videotape that Armin recorded, a recording that authorities viewed and then locked away, intended only to be viewed later in court, then never again. But locked away information has a way of making its way to the public, which we'll get to in a bit. Armin wrapped, labeled, and stored meal-sized sections of Bernd in his freezer to eat later, then buried his head in the garden. And for his second meal that featured Bernd's flesh, he was determined to make it a very special occasion. He pan-broiled a section of Bernd's backside and delighted in preparing for a more proper meal. He set out his mother's best table linen, dinnerware, and candles, and he paired the meal with a good red wine. He said, "I sautéed the steak of Bernd with salt, pepper, garlic, and nutmeg. I had it with princess croquettes, Brussels sprouts, and a green pepper sauce." He said that the meat was a little tough and tasted similar to pork, but stronger. Over the next several months, Armin feasted on Bernd's flesh that he had stored in the freezer under pizza boxes, ultimately consuming 20 kilograms or 44 pounds of his flesh. He claimed that it gave him sexual satisfaction that he couldn't achieve before. He also claimed that, with every bite, my memory of him grew stronger. Once Armin had fulfilled his fantasy with Bernd, he needed more. He returned to the forums looking for others interested in the same fate. In an email he wrote to a friend, he stated, "I hope I will soon find another victim. the flesh, referring to Burns' flesh, has almost gone. But hunting for more willing participants would prove to be Armin's downfall. In July 2001, one of his online correspondents, an Australian college student, was alarmed by Armin's search for more victims, along with his detailed account of having done this before. The student contacted police and told them everything he had learned about Armin. Police tracked Armin's activity on the internet for 17 months before finally closing in on him. In December of 2002, a search warrant was issued and police descended on Armin's mansion in search of evidence. Armin is incredibly cooperative with the police and promptly confesses to nearly everything, even leading them to the tape recording. He initially denies that the meat in his freezer is human, but when pressed, he confesses to that as well. Armin's trial began a year later in December of 2003. Given that law enforcement had access to 2 hours of vivid, grisly, and explicit video evidence of exactly what took place, the defense knew their client was not walking away without penalty. So they pleaded to the lowest charge possible of killing on demand, an illegal form of euthanasia. And ironically, because of that same videotape, the prosecution figured they wouldn't be able to get a first-degree murder conviction since the tape showed Burns consenting. They also faced the hurdle that cannibalism itself wasn't actually illegal in Germany. So they had to consider their options for alternate charges. They went with murder for sexual pleasure, which would guarantee him 15 years in prison, and held manslaughter as a backup charge, which carried a lesser sentence of 8.5 years. And for good measure, they also charged him with disturbing the peace of the dead. The case sparked a public debate over whether Armin should even be held responsible, since Burns was a voluntary participant every step of the way. Once the trial was underway, a psychiatrist determined that Armin had a fetishistic obsession with male flesh and an absolutely uncommon, highly pathological form of bonding. Armin could only perceive the maximum bond to another human being by consuming that person's flesh. The court held that despite Armin's severe personality disorder, he was fully responsible for his crime and fit to stand trial. They referenced his very organized, planned, and deliberate behavior both before and after the crime. He didn't act in the heat of the moment. He wasn't under the influence at any point of his gruesome acts. The court was even able to directly witness his calm, calculated demeanor with their very own eyes. Since 19 minutes of key moments from the gruesome 2-hour videotape were played in court once the public and the press were dismissed from the courtroom. The video contained Armin amputating Burns' genitals on a kitchen chopping board, and continued on through him being disemboweled. While Germany is known for its tradition of open trials, it was too much to allow anyone who wasn't required to see the video to do so. Viewers who did watch the 19 minutes of footage in court were so traumatized by what they saw, they needed to undergo therapy following the trial. Burns' boyfriend, Renee Jasnik, testified during the trial, sharing that Burns had never entertained morbid thoughts and that they were happy and in the process of planning a vacation together before Burns left for Rothenburg. Jasnik said that Armin had sent him a letter apologizing for having eaten his boyfriend. However, one of Burns' former lovers testified that Burns had once offered him 2,000 euros to bite off his penis. Regardless of what Burns' state of mind had been prior to that fateful day, it was clear from the videotape that at the time of the killing, he was a more than willing participant. The court was also told by a detective that even though it was not directly related to the current case, Armin was under investigation for the disappearances of at least 2 other men that he had been corresponding with on Cannibal Cafe. The detective told the court that it was impossible to determine whether any of the 204 people that Armin was corresponding with may have also fallen victim to him. The defense contended that there was no crime since the victim was a voluntary participant, and, in fact, asked for it. The video shown in court did indeed show Burns giving full consent, right up until the moment he lost consciousness. Armin's defense suggested that the killing was a mercy killing. They argued that murder always happens against somebody's will, and that that was not the case here. They also claimed that Armin was not a danger to society, with a psychologist testifying that he was a cannibal of love, and that he was fully in control of his urges and only acted on them when he knew was appropriate. During the trial, several men who had similar fantasies of eating human flesh testified that there was a large community of like-minded enthusiasts who chatted online to satisfy their fantasies. Armin himself testified that his victim came to be of his own free will. For him, it was a nice death. And I wanted to eat him. I didn't want to kill him. I had my big kick and I don't need to do it again. "I regret it all very much, but I can't undo it." But then he also testified that, "If I hadn't been so stupid as to keep looking on the internet, I would have taken my secret to the grave." On January 30th, 2004, the court concluded that Armin Meiwes did not have base motives in his killing of Bernd Jurgen Brandes, but that he was undoubtedly responsible for his death. They found him guilty of manslaughter. Going into sentencing, the prosecution worried that if the court punished Armin Meiwes lightly, they would unwittingly encourage cannibalism. And on the flip side, Armin's defense argued that harsh sentences should be reserved for the horror of real murders. Armin Meiwes was sentenced to 8.5 years in prison. Armin and his defense were not satisfied, but neither was the prosecution. In a surprise move, it would be the prosecution who would appeal. A move and the result of which is unheard of in the US. So sit tight for a gripping, update-packed Z section. Armin Meiwes' 8.5-year sentence was not the last word. The prosecution, dissatisfied with the lenient term handed down, appealed the sentence. They believed that he should have been convicted of murder, not manslaughter, and that he should have received a life sentence. Federal judges overturned the ruling and ordered a retrial, arguing that when the lower court rejected the murder charges, they failed to give sufficient consideration to any sexual motive for the killing. The retrial focused on whether Bernd was legally capable of agreeing to his killing, given some mental issues that were uncovered, along with the sleeping pills, alcohol, and medicine he consumed. They also set out to determine whether Armin killed Bernd because Bernd asked him to, or for his own sexual gratification. In May of 2006, Armin Meiwes was convicted again, this time for murder, and for disturbing the peace of the dead. He was sentenced to life in prison. In 2008, over the course of 30 jailhouse visits, Armin was interviewed for a book and documentary called Interview with a Cannibal. In them, he laid out in nearly as much graphic detail as his home video his horrifying actions on the night of the murder, as well as in-depth insight into his life and childhood that led up to his desires and crimes. During the interviews, he acknowledged that what he did was wrong, and he warned the many other cannibals who had surfaced since his case drew notoriety that the wishes, the fantasies you have, that these could never be fulfilled, that these things you dream about could only be a dream. The Meiwes mansion, where the murder took place, was destroyed in a fire in April of 2023. The cause of the fire was suspected to be arson. The Armin Meiwes case has had a significant cultural impact. Multiple films and songs have either referred to or been fully based on this case, which continues to fascinate true crime fans worldwide. As of the making of this video, Cannibal Cafe is no longer online, and is reported to have been taken down by a denial-of-service attack back in 2002. However, it can still be viewed by the curious on the Internet Archive by visiting the link in the description. Armin's posts, however, were removed once he was arrested. And while that forum, as well as the Yahoo chat where Armin and Bernd connected, are no longer active, the online cannibal community still persists on other platforms. At the time of the murders, police estimated there were 8,000 to 10,000 people in Germany alone who were using internet chat rooms to share fantasies about eating a person or about being eaten. But of that number, they suspected that only a tiny portion would be willing to see their fantasies through to a fatal conclusion, like Bernd did. While Armin's gruesome home video was locked away, never to see the light of day, it appears that authorities were at least partially successful. The video itself appears to have never emerged online. However, screenshots from the video that claim to be legitimate have leaked onto the internet. Of course, we're not allowed to show such graphic content in this video, and we cannot verify their legitimacy. But we have included a link in the description for the curious, but be forewarned that they are graphic and not for the faint of heart. Armin Meiwes was sent to serve his life sentence in a prison in Kassel, central Germany. In prison, Armin worked in the prison library and laundry facilities, joined a prisoners group favoring Green Party politics, attended church, and became a vegetarian. He also reportedly consulted with law enforcement to help them analyze a case involving 2 boys who were found murdered and mutilated, possibly by the same killer. Armin was eligible for parole in 2018, with it being customary in Germany for those sentenced to life to be released once they served 15 years. But in October of 2018, once he had served those 15 years, the court rejected his release, agreeing with experts that there is currently no favorable outlook for his future behavior. However, just 2 years after that, the court granted that he is allowed to leave prison in a disguise. He is accompanied by 2 officers when he's allowed out and is taken to another state. He is allowed to walk through town wearing sunglasses and a hat so that people don't recognize him. The debate continues about whether Armin deserved such a harsh sentence, given that both of the men were consenting adults. What are your thoughts? Do you think Armin deserved the sentence he received? Should he still be locked up without disguise outings? Please share your thoughts in the comments below, and if you like how we presented this case, please do hit that like button, and definitely hit subscribe so you never miss a single video.